Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're watching me from. Here in Kenya, it is 9:30 in the evening. I know in some parts of the world it's morning, in some parts it's noon, and I'm happy to be able to address you from here. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Kanute Waswa. Uh, my name Waswa means the white ant of the savannah. Okay, the savannah is the grassland in Africa, which has beautiful grass and acacia trees, and we have termites that are specifically found in the savannah. They're a delicacy, and they only come out when it rains. And so my name means I was born when it was raining, and the termites in the savannah had come out to fly. And I'm happy to interact with you during these special times at this time. And I'm happy to be able to do this recording from home and share it with the world. Who is Waswa? Waswa is a husband and a father. I am a husband of one and a father to three. My firstborn, Shawana, is 15. My secondborn is 13. And my lastborn is 11. And I am a homeschooling father. My wife and I have been homeschooling for the last 12 or so years. In essence, we have homeschooled all our children from birth. Our children have never been to formal school, and we'd like to homeschool them through high school so that they just go on to university if they want to do that. I'm from Kenya. Kenya is a country on the East African coast, on the Horn of Africa, next to South Sudan, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Somalia. And Kenya has a coast on the Indian Ocean. One special thing about Kenya is that we have all the ecological optimums of the world. I mean, talk about the desert in the northern part of Kenya, talk about tropical mountain forests, talk about the savanna, talk about snow and ice right on top of Mount Kenya at 17,000 feet. We have all the ecological optimums of the world. And of course, I don't need to say this, but we are the land of the greatest marathon runners in the world. Interesting because in my sharing and my conversation today, we are going to draw analogies from the marathon, how it is a long play, and how we need to pace ourselves to see how we are moving. I mean, as a homeschooling father, I also serve on the steering committee of the Each Africa Community of Home Educators, and I'm also a member of the African Home Education Exchange, which is part of the Global Home Education Exchange. And my wife and I have been giving homeschool support to homeschooling parents in Kenya, in Africa, and in other parts of the world for the last 10 years or so. And today I'm happy and excited to be speaking to this audience, predominantly in Quebec, Canada, but also in other parts of the world. Uh, the first reason is we have lots of similarities with Canada, Kenya being a Commonwealth country, and so a lot of our government systems are actually fashioned along the Commonwealth government systems. But secondly, Canada is also dear to my heart, and this is because when I left university, my address for 1 year in 2003 was 996 Chetwynd Road, Bucks Falls, Ontario, as an instructor with Outward Bound. It was part of the most exciting component of my life because I was able to interact with people from all over the world. Going kayaking down the Ottawa River was my coldest experience ever in my whole life. It reminded me of the movie Cool Runnings about the Jamaican bobsled team in the 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics. Had just come from, the warm heart of Africa right into cold, cold Canada. But I have to confess and say that I got memories that last a lifetime. Got a bit of a taste of maple syrup. And to date, during the Winter Olympics, you'll find me cheering on the Canadian ice hockey team. Uh, no one knows, no one plays ice hockey in Kenya. But those are some of the experiences I carried with me from Canada. And today I'm excited and happy to be part of this conversation with you. It is about how to engage with government, and I have titled it The Judo Way. Uh, why did I call it the Judo Way? Because Judo is a Japanese martial art. Okay, it requires the participant to have lots of discipline, but also a combination of many other things. Talk about judgment and foresight. How do you judge your enemy? Talk about reasonable self-denial. Talk about tenacity and pursuit. Talk about initiative and creativity. All those are encompassed in judo, and it's a metaphor I'd like to use today as we talk about engaging government. The objective of judo is two. You can either take down your opponent, or secondly, you can immobilize your opponent. And so, uh, speaking about myself, I actually practiced judo for a bit in high school. Someone who practices judo is called a judoka. Okay, so I was a judoka in high school. And the interesting thing is, my judo instructor was actually my math teacher who doubled up as my instructor. And there are 5 lessons that I would like to share with us that I learned from judo. And I never forgot. And today, I always remember them when I'm thinking about this whole process of engaging government. And the first lesson in judo is always pack your mat. I mean, as I said, a practitioner is called a judoka, and the place where you practice your judo is called the dojo. And the first thing you always do when you go to the dojo is to pack your mat so that you can start your practice. And that means that even in life, there are things you always do. You never get away from the basics. No matter what level of judo you are in, you always pack your mat. And so even for us as homeschoolers, as people who are engaging with government in this process, there are basics and certain things we must always do. And I hope to talk about such things as we continue in this conversation. The second thing is, it is not about the size of the judoka in the fight. It is about the size of the fight in the judoka. What do I mean by this? When we engage with government, any government is a behemoth. It is a bureaucracy. The odds against you are 1,000 to 1. And so it is not about your size as, excuse me, your size as a homeschool organization or about where you are, but it is about the fire you have in the belly. It is about your tenacity in pursuit. And that is something that will always carry you when you are engaging with government. The third lesson that I learned in judo was there is always a way. You know, many times I found myself in a situation where someone who was double my weight was right on top of me and trying to get me into a chokehold. And I always had to remind myself that there is always a way. When you have that mentality and that philosophy, it always ends up that even when engaging with government, you get to discover that despite the fact that you're feeling there's many odds against you, there is always a way to get around it. The fourth lesson I learned in judo is courage is like a muscle. And just like any muscle, it grows stronger when you use it and it atrophies when you do not use it. Just using an analogy of when you have been in hospital for a while, sometimes when you come out, you have to go to a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist to help you exercise your muscle. This is because muscles atrophy when you don't use them. But when you use them, you build it. And so courage is a muscle that you will need to use when engaging with government. And when you use it, guess what? You actually end up building it. And finally, the fifth lesson I learned from judo is you will never get back a missed opportunity. When you are engaging with your opponent, you get windows of opportunity. Sometimes when they let their guard down, sometimes when they have the wrong stance, sometimes when they are coming on the offense and you can use the momentum. There are always opportunities. Now, the key lesson in that is you will never get back a missed opportunity. And so, how do you get to use and to utilize that opportunity when engaging with government? But then, just to give us a bit of background of education in Kenya, which ties in a lot with Kenya's history, I'm going to take you back 100 years ago. And the year, it's actually 120 years ago. The year is 1899. The first people to come to Kenya were the Imperial British East Africa Company, who came in to trade and to build the Kenya-Uganda Railway. They did that for 20 years until 1920, when Kenya became a crown colony. Why is that important? Because when Kenya became a crown colony, we had a governor who was stationed in Kenya, but who was ruling on behalf of the Queen. But then it was the king, it was King George. And when King George died in 1953, it became the Queen, Queen Elizabeth. Now, this is important because the Queen had absolute powers, but the governor had delegated powers from the Queen. This means that the government system in Kenya was designed for control. Now, this is important because, as you're going to see down the road, fundamentally this has never changed. And so it was a crown colony from 1920 to 1963. When Kenya got her independence, we got our first prime minister, who got the powers of the governor. 1 year later, Kenya now went beyond internal self-government into full independence. And at that point, the president amalgamated the powers of the Queen and the prime minister. And in that sense, we ended up with an imperial presidency and one strong centralized government. This is a system that we had from 1963 until 1990, when we had a review of the constitution to make Kenya a multi-party democracy. And that continued until 2010, when we got a new constitution. And right now, as a country, we are discussing what do we need to do about that, because there are things that we need to fix in the constitution that somehow we found are not really working for us. Now, why have I taken the pains to take you through a journey of Kenya in the last 120 years? There are three reasons for this. The first reason is the fact that our system was designed for control. When you look at our civil service, it was designed for control. When you look at our legal jurisprudence, it was actually designed to meet the needs and the objectives of the colonial minority. And when they went away and Kenya became independent, fundamentally that never changed. And as you're going to see, part of engaging with government means engaging with the legal process and with the civil service, both of which are designed for control. And the third thing is the fact that Kenya's education system was not designed to make us unlock the value of our potential for what it's worth. Quite on the contrary, it was actually designed to create workers for the system. And to date, again, fundamentally, that has never changed. So talk about rote learning, talk about an exam-centric culture, talk about a system that only looks at one type of intelligence, which is linguistic and mathematical linear, and not the other intelligences like the creatives. And that is the system in which we find ourselves. And so when we engage with government, we are basically engaging with a system that has been there for the last 100 years, but which was not designed to fit the purposes for what an education system is supposed to do. That's the first reason. The second reason I have taken you through a journey of 100 years is because government moves slowly. You remember the incident last month where we had this cargo ship on the Suez Canal called the Evergreen that is run by the company Ever Given. And it blocked the Suez Canal. And it took them about a week to unblock it because it was causing traffic through the canal. But it was such a huge ship that they had to do lots of maneuvers in physics to get it moving. In a sense, when you're engaging with government, you are actually trying to turn the evergreen. Be prepared for the long play. And finally, every government system, and here I'm talking about Kenya, I'm talking about Canada, I'm talking about other governments, the government systems and processes and procedures and operations are anchored in legislature. So when we go to engage government, not only must we look at what we have to look for the short term, but the ultimate we have to do is to see how do we engage this process in legislature? How do we go about that? Considering that it is not designed for innovativeness and creativity, but it is actually designed for control. I'm going to give you a Kenyan case study, and hopefully I'm going to pick lessons from that to see what does this mean for us in our context in the different parts of the world where we're listening to my address. In 2019, February the 18th, Silas, who lives in a town called Kakamega in Western Kenya. Kakamega is about 8 to 10 hours drive away from Nairobi, which is the capital city. Silas was an innocent homeschooling father living in a rural part of Kenya who got arrested by the chief. Now, for purposes of context, the Kenyan administration has the national administration, and then you have provincial administration, and then you have district administration, and then you have the local administration. And so the chief is the face of the government at the local level. So Silas was arrested by the chief and locked in a police cell. And the following day, he was taken to court and accused of not taking his children to school. In fact, it was framed as a criminal case against him. The children were taken to the juvenile court and accused of not being in school. Now, right there, three things jump out at you. Number one, this is actually a human rights issue. He was arrested on a Monday and taken to court on a Tuesday. No time to prepare for his defense, no time to put his affairs in order. He was basically thrown into the deep end. Secondly, the cases that were framed against him, when you unpack them, they were actually cases that had no basis. But here he was in the court, his children were in court, he was under so much pressure, he ended up doing a plea bargain with the court. Basically telling the court, okay, I will take my children to school on condition that you release me. And so the children were released and the juvenile cases against the children were dropped, but the criminal case against Silas was maintained. After that is when he got in touch with part of the leadership of the East Africa Community of Homeschoolers, on which I serve, and he told us about his situation and what was happening. We had conversations back and forth, introduced him to a lawyer just to see how to engage with his case. And ultimately, the lawyer went ahead and filed a constitutional petition and at the same time seeking for a stay order against the criminal case against Silas that was in Western Kenya. That was in February 2018. Now we are in June 2021. 1.5 years later, we have had 18 interactions with the judge and with the Constitutional Court, but as we speak, the case has not even started. Silas was the petitioner in this particular situation. The respondents were the Attorney General, who is the government legal advisor, and the Minister of Education on behalf of the ministry. As we speak, 18 months later, the respondents have not even turned up in court. And so we go to court and we're told the respondents have not turned up, and we're given another date for the issue to be mentioned. And as at January last year, the court said, can you guys just go and agree amongst themselves? And this is because the way our judicial system is designed, a court is a dispute resolution mechanism of last resort. And so many times the court will tell you, go out and sort matters amongst yourselves. And if you can't agree, come back and we'll see how the court will engage. Now, that is a window of opportunity for us, and it's something that we are trying to work on. But as you can see, what I said earlier, when you are coming to engage with government, it is always the long play. It is a marathon. You have to be prepared to be in it for the long haul. And ultimately, you have to learn to pace yourself. Now, as the East Africa community of homeschoolers, we have realized that we needed to be immersed in this process, principally because the constitutional petition has to do with an individual who is homeschooling, but because the legal system is based on what we call legal precedent, whatever ruling is given by the judge in this situation is going to apply on all homeschoolers in Kenya. And that means we must have skin in the game. We must get involved. The second thing is we have realized that we must be able to be in a position where we can give meaning to this whole process. Case in point, the Kenyan Constitution, it gives every child a right to education. But when you go to the Education Act, it says that every child must go to school. And if you don't go to school, it is a criminal offense. Now, you can see there from a philosophical perspective, you are given a right to education, but education is not defined. It is schooling that is defined. Right there, you can see any expert would have gone on to define education and not school, because if you define education, automatically school gets defined. And so we have found ourselves in a space where we have to go in and help the court to define the meaning of education, because homeschooling plays in the space of education, and schooling does not just happen in school. But as I said, this is going to be a long process. We have had to remind ourselves to have fun while at it. Okay? At some point, some of us went and applied to be friends of the court, and the judge said, I don't recognize you. The only way I can recognize you is if you can be able to go out and go and apply to the deputy registrar so that you can come and bring your application. Then I can be able to say, now I recognize you. And they said, right on, we are going to do that. Let's have fun while at it, as we seek to become friends of the court and inform the court in this process. But as you can see, it has been a little experience in getting a taste of the system. This system that I told you was created for control, this system that moves ever so slowly, and this system that you have learned to play judo with. Of course, we recognize that we run the risk of the judge making a ruling without being informed by us as homeschoolers who are the principal players in this. And so we had to move in and make sure that risk is mitigated. We had to call for a lot of support from the homeschooling community in Kenya and even globally, and we are still doing it. And there I'll mention getting homeschoolers together many times is like herding cats. We only come together when we are facing a common danger. And right now, because of that situation, that has become our common danger, and we have somehow had to rally around each other. But at the same time, we've had to have lots of introspection, in the sense of what do we need to seek for the short term, make sure that homeschoolers can continue doing our thing in Kenya and not be getting disturbed. But the long play is how can we speak into the educational policy in this country? How can we speak into the legal jurisprudence concerning homeschooling in this country? And ultimately, how can we anchor this system in the constitution and the laws of the land so that we can continue to homeschool? But in this whole process, we have learned to think out of the box. Case in point, just how do we frame our petition, which we present to the judge, in such a way that we can talk about the same thing in different ways, so that in case the judge misses to see it one way, he can always see it the other. Lots of out of the box thinking. But finally, I'll tell you, we are not lawyers, we are not schooled in the legal process, but we know enough of schooling, we know enough of education, and we know enough of the Education Act to do this and to even be able to give a briefing to the lawyers that we are using in this process. And so it has been a very natural and organic process for us as homeschoolers in Kenya as we engage government in this process. Now, so far, we have learned three fundamental lessons. And the first lesson is when it comes to government, there are always three cogs of a wheel. I like to compare them to three wheels of a gear. And these three cogs are political promises, how government works, and realities on the ground. Let me explain. In the year 2003, we had our elections and we got a new president who was an economist. Part of his election promises was free and compulsory primary education. And so when he came in, beginning 1st January 2004, that became government policy. It was a political promise, which became a presidential directive, and it ended up becoming official government policy. Political promise. How does government work? You see, when government officials came in to enforce a presidential directive, they became overzealous because the interpretation was any child who is not in school is breaking the law of the land. And so they went out, rounding up children and parents and families, telling them, you are breaking the law, you must go to school. And lots of homeschoolers at that point fell victim to how government works, because that is how government policy is always interpreted. But what are the realities on the ground? The realities on the ground is 15, 18 years later, now we have overcrowded schools. We have 50, 60, 70 children in a classroom. Our teacher-student ratio is very high. In fact, in some places, we have no infrastructures, we have no teachers. And so even the government is realizing that this model does not work. Something needs to be done about it. So at the face of it, as homeschoolers, we are sitting ducks in the sense that any government official can come and tell you, you are breaking the law of the land, you are breaking a presidential directive. But the other reality is the government is so concerned with all the other aspects of education, they really don't have time to come for us, which gives us a window of opportunity to put our affairs in order. Just goes back to what I talked about judo, the fifth lesson, that you never get an opportunity the second time that you missed the first time. And so for us, this has become an opportunity for us because of the realities on the ground as they stand. Now, having learned these lessons, I have had certain reflections. The first reflection is thank God for COVID, because Silas' case in Western Kenya and being taken to the police and being taken into court and the constitutional petition, all these things happened before COVID, and then COVID happened. You see, when COVID happened, it presented us with a wonderful opportunity because even the government itself was finally coming to ask homeschoolers the four most frequently asked questions that homeschoolers are always asked. Number one, is it legal? You can imagine the government itself, because schools had to be closed, children were sent back. We had a lockdown in Kenya, students were home for 7 months, and the government officials are coming and asking, does this work? How does this thing work? And so you can imagine, we were actually invited by government, by the media, by the press to talk about, the psychology of education. How does teaching happen? How does learning happen? We're talking about the pedagogy of education. How do you teach? How do you make sure learning is happening? We're talking about the psychology and the methodology of education, all these questions being asked by government. And so it was a wonderful opportunity that was given to us by COVID. We were being asked, can anyone do it? It is because children were stuck at home with their parents, and now for the first time, many parents had to face the reality of having to teach their children themselves as they were hanging out with their children. Wonderful opportunity that was presented to us by COVID. And of course, the question of socialization. How does socialization happen? And we actually got a wonderful opportunity to just unpack the mystery of homeschooling to people around us, including to government officials. And so, looking back, COVID gave us a wonderful opportunity to finally step up and engage with all the publics that are involved in education, including government. And that has not stopped. It continues to go on. The second thing is we have now found ourselves in a space where we are working towards a policy framework to determine that homeschooling meets the constitutional framework of education. Remember what I mentioned earlier. Our constitution gives every child a right to education. But then the Education Act says every child must go to school, which presupposes that learning only happens in school. Now we are in that space where we are engaging in this conversation and saying, can we be able to revisit this? Now, of course, that is long play. As I mentioned earlier, every government process is actually anchored in the legislative process. It is a legislative process first before it becomes policy, which has to be implemented by government officials. But remember, any legislative process is a political process first, because it is politicians who end up making laws which end up being implemented by government workers. And so we are realizing that part of our long play means we have to engage at a legislative level, we have to engage at an executive level, and when we are dealing with the courts, with regard to informing the courts, we are actually engaging at a judicial level. Now, this is engagement at multiple fronts. The beautiful thing is, because we are part of the Global Home Education Exchange, we have had wonderful opportunities to cross-pollinate and to work with our colleagues who have done this in many different countries around the world. We have had opportunities for comparative jurisprudence in places like Brazil, and we are continuing to learn from them. In a sense, we feel as though we are building this ship as we are sailing. But we have built our capacity, we have built our competencies, we have built our skills, we have built our knowledge, we have built our experience in this process, and we are continuing to do it simply because COVID happened and it gave us a wonderful opportunity to do comparative jurisprudence in this process. And so that has been a very beautiful takeaway from COVID. But finally, as WASWA, what can I say have been some of the lessons that I have learned in this process? The first thing is, I wish that as homeschoolers, we had come together earlier. If we had come together earlier and we had formed a homeschool organization, whatever happened to Silas in Western Kenya would not have happened because we'd have had the safety in numbers, just packing together and being able to come out and speak with one voice. And now we are looking at the possibilities of making the community of homeschoolers a membership organization, so that when a situation like this happens, we are able to come in together and speak as one voice. My second takeaway is the fact that we have realized we should have prepared a starter pack for homeschoolers so that when a government official comes in, they can be able to have answers at their fingertips, which they can give the government official. Because we realize that when government gets involved, many times they actually mean well. 90% of the times they mean well. They just need to know that children in Kenya are going to school. They don't want children to be abused. They don't want children to be deprived of their education. And when you can be able to prove that to them, then many times they actually engage you in very positive organization. And so a starter pack would be even some sort of basic portfolio, just saying, this is what I do with my children, this is how we do our math, this is how we do our reading. And remember, because government thinks in systems, you may need to show some sort of scope and sequence. You may need to walk them through the content of that. And for government officials, that is good enough. Many times from our experience, we have realized if you are not able to communicate this with government, then it is interpreted as though your children are not learning. And yet, a lot of learning is happening. Now, that means that if our membership had a starter pack to be able to engage with government with regard to scope and sequence, with regard to content of education, with regard to just some sort of proof saying this is what my children are learning, this is good enough. But the other lessons we have realized is a lot of the tension with the government happens because of misunderstanding. If I can speak about Kenya, in African culture, we are not a litigant culture. And so many times when we find government coming to interfere with homeschoolers, it is because there was misunderstanding amongst family members. An uncle or an aunt or a grandfather or grandmother, a relative is concerned that children are not learning. They try asking you, how come these children are not in school? Because that is their interpretation and understanding of learning. They don't get good enough answers. And what do? They go ahead and involve government. And so it is basically a communication problem that we are solving. It is not a schooling or education problem. Communication problems are solved through relationships. They are not solved through litigation. And the beauty around that is Our judicial system is designed in such a way that it is a dispute resolution mechanism of last resort. And so even when we go to court, they will always tell you as much as possible, can you go and sort this out amongst yourselves and bring us a progress report? And if you cannot do that, then we will have to take it up. And many times, this is the path that we take, and I would say comfortably, 95% of the times, it always works. And so we wish you had prepared a starter pack for our members, and that is something you may want to think about with regard to your membership in the respective countries where you are. But finally, I would say, just as my judo instructor said, we need to keep practicing in the dojo. You never move away from the basics. You always need to know what is happening in government circles, what is a good opportunity for you to engage, how can you use and take advantage of opportunities to validate yourself and to validate homeschooling. You keep practicing in the dojo. And the beauty of that is, as you keep practicing, you get better at it. You get better at articulating homeschooling to government officials. You get better at engaging with government officials. You even get to understand how the court system works, how some things you just need to go to the court registrar, how for some things you don't need to go to the open court. You can go to the judge in the chambers. How for some things you just need to file a document with the government. The beauty with engaging with government is, just like any bureaucracy, many times even one arm of the government is not aware of what another arm of the government is doing, which gives you a wonderful opportunity to put your dojo practice in action, in the sense that you can be able to draft a document to government, get an acknowledgement, and have that document in your file. When you have that document, whenever a government official comes, you will ask, we have actually been waiting to hear from you. I'll give you an example. Our colleagues in South Africa, because their law says that every child must have an education equivalent to the lowest level of education in the public school system, they just wrote to government and asked them, how can we ensure that this happens? We'd like to homeschool our children, but we'd like to make sure that their standard is equivalent to the lowest standard. How can this be done? They wrote a letter to government, the government acknowledged the letter, and they kept a copy of that letter in their files. They have had that letter for the last 25 years. And so, whenever any government official comes, you can actually enjoy the process and ask them, we have actually been waiting for you to give us this answer, and pick it up from there. Enjoy the process. Keep practicing in the dojo. As you keep doing it, you actually get better at it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it was just my way of sharing our experiences in Kenya and some of the few things we've been able to do. I hope you have learned something. I hope there is something for you to pick from here. Ultimately, we are in this together. We are cross-pollinating. We'd also love to hear and to learn from you. At the end of the day, we are rooting for the same team. Sink or swim, we are in it together. As homeschoolers, here in Kenya, we are saying, keep on, keep at it. As we engage government, enjoy the process. The best is yet to come. Thank you very much. At this point, I'll be happy to take in your questions. Thank you, and bye from Nairobi, Kenya, the warm, warm heart of Africa. Goodbye.